Today in episode 38 of the podcast, we're going to be talking about our favorite films. These are films that we love to watch over and over again that will always stick with us. I'm Brad, he's Josh, and welcome to We'll Bring the Popcorn.
Before we start talking about our favorite films of all time, if you would, please drop us a like on this video, subscribe to the podcast, get the notification bell so you're notified every time we drop new episodes every Monday. We're talking about TV news, doing film reviews and TV reviews every week. We love talking about movies and film. Obviously, with this episode, we're going to talk about our favorite films of all time. Don't forget to go to wbtp.link for all our social media info and join us on Discord. Let's start talking about your favorite films and TV shows and what you're watching. We'd love to have that conversation with you.
And if you're listening on our audio podcast, make sure you leave us a review. That's going to help us out a lot, and we'd really appreciate it if you did so.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about our favorite films of all time. So what does that mean for us? So for us, it's, films that obviously make us fans of film in the first place, right? So these are movies that for whatever reason, we either liked them in a particular time in our lives. They are films that just mean the most to us, make us fans of the genre of filmmaking as well. We're going to cover all different kinds of movies as well. We've each put together a list and we're kind of just going to talk through them. And looking at our list, we have a fair amount of overlap as well. I know you and I have our own differing opinions on certain films, but the way we both approach, watching movies is, I feel is very similar. We take a very similar approach. We get similar things out of watching film, which I think creates a fun conversation dynamic that we could have that ultimately led us to, doing a podcast like this in the first place.
Yeah, because I think everyone's favorite films list can change a lot depending on if you put someone on the spot, they may say these films, but then if you have them sit down and think about it, they might say something else. Even if you sat down and thought about it and you're asked again, you might say different ones, because it really depends on not only the emotional state and the state you're in now, but what were you in when you saw it? Did the film have an emotional impact on you? Was it just because it was so funny? Was it because it had incredible action, or it was so well filmed and acted that it left? There's a lot of different criteria people can have with their favorite films. And, we did a guilty pleasure list as well, which you can go back and see that episode. But, some of those guilty pleasures could move into our favorite films. And it doesn't mean they're the top greatest movies of all time, but they had an impact on us that stayed with us to be I can watch this film so many times and never get bored of it.
Absolutely. And it's like you said, you could ask me this exact same question tomorrow and I may have a different answer than what I told you today. Now, some of the films that I know are going to be hard in my list every time you ask me, and then there's going to be some that could, rotate their way in and out, but there's so many things that you can approach this from a perspective of, there's so many different genres of films. There's so many different, each director and producer have their own style of shooting a film. Is there something that really resonates with you from a particular director? Is there a director that you gravitate towards that you really like the way they film, movies and present stories? And there's just so much that goes into what makes a film great. And it's so much, that's why it's so much fun to talk about, because everybody's viewing these things through a different set of eyes and have different standards and criteria for what they determine to be good movies. And I'm kind of excited to start diving into our list. Did you want to start with if you wanted to start with your number one, or did you have one in particular you wanted to lead with?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to put it in any particular order, but there'll be an order. Yeah. But I guarantee after we're done filming this, I'm going to think of so many other films that I should have talked about that. I should have talked about this. But yeah, I can kick it off because this one has resonated with me for a long time. And it's one that it had an emotional impact on me. It was one because I'm kind of a hopeless romantic and kind of in that. And this was such from a story standpoint, but also from a filming standpoint. It did so much practical, interesting things with filming, and that's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So this was Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet as Joel and Clementine. And, it's a love story, but it's also kind of science fiction in a way because, they have a relationship, but it doesn't go so well. So Clementine has her memories erased of Joel in this, procedure. And so Joel goes back and does the same thing, but he has second thoughts because he realizes he doesn't want to forget, even though, you know, things may have went bad or everything else, that those memories still make up who we are and our experiences, and he doesn't want to do it. But it did have it's one of the best performances of Jim Carrey. It's like Truman Show, which I'm not going to have on my list today, is also another one of his that I really loved, and Man on the Moon and everything. But this was one of his more dramatic roles that had a bigger impact on me because he was brilliant in it. Kate Winslet, she's been brilliant in just about everything. Like, she's amazing. But it was also the practical way that they did this film and the interesting twist, because, you know, it starts off at the end, then it goes to their story and then comes back around to the end. But they do a lot of practical, like, transitions of, you know, Kate is in this spot, but then in the very next scene she's in a new spot, and they did cutaways in the wall. Or, you know, there's a scene where Jim Carrey's he's playing his younger self like he's a kid underneath a table, but it was all practical of how they did the perspective to make the table look huge and him look small. Like, it was just such a interesting film that they made from a story point, from filming, acting. Like, it's one of my absolute favorite films.
It's a beautifully shot movie, and that movie itself emotionally kind of punches you in the gut too. Like, it's a strong movie, and it was it's actually my favorite dramatic Jim Carrey role as well. It's such a beautifully shot, and like in a way that you don't see a ton of, like, from, like you said, just from an aesthetic perspective. Like, it's a beautiful story. It's a wonderfully told story. I see why it's on your list, because it's fantastic. If you haven't seen it, we can't recommend, you know, going to see it enough. Obviously, we're going to talk about it being our favorite movie, so we're going to recommend every single one of these. But you know, Jim Carrey is so iconic for being this over-the-top, you know, goofy, you know, comedic physical actor. And spoiler alert, one of my favorite films is one of his comedic roles, in my opinion, his best comedic role. But, and that's just to speak to my sense of humor and how I like to approach stuff, but this is absolutely a fantastic movie. And it's hands down, like, one of his top 2 or 3 performances in film. And it's such a good story. It punches you in the gut. It kind of breaks your heart a little bit too, because it is that beautiful dynamic of, you know, if you can erase your memory, would you, kind of thing, to kind of forget some of the awful things that have happened to you, or things not going the way you would hope they would. But that's also part of the beauty that makes us who we are as people, and how we learn and grow from those experiences. So, and him really struggling with that dilemma to kind of like preserve those memories. Like, it's a really well told story that I absolutely loved.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful told, like, acting, directing, cinematography, story. Like, it just hits so many levels for me, and I just love it so much. It's weird, quirky.
Of course,
you know, you get Jim gets to be a little silly in it, but it's a more grounded. Like, you get to see such a different emotional weight to how he carries himself in a film and stuff too. And yeah, it's had a lasting impact on me from the first moment I saw it. Like, once I saw it for the first time, I was like, wow. That is just something that's just going to stick with me, and it has, because, I mean, it's an older film now, I think over 20 years old, but it's still stuck with me, and one that I'll try to watch about once a year, just because it's not something I could watch over and over and over back to back, because it is such a heavy movie, but it's something I watch at least once a year.
Yeah, I feel like you have to be in a certain place emotionally to really watch that movie too. Like, you have to be in kind of a good space, but you have to kind of be okay with being a little bit sad after you watch it too, because it does such a good job of making you think and be introspective. And like, those are the types of films that I get a lot of enjoyment out of. Not saying I like to like put myself in that kind of headspace, but it's fun to help make you think. And, you know, like, not every film needs to be, like I say, not every film needs to be, you know, artistic and life-changing and need to be serious, but there's absolutely a space for those films as well. And I think this does a really, really good job of being that artistically shot, thought-provoking type of film, and it does such a good job of, you know, hitting all those notes and really leave you like just thinking about your life and your place in the world and your situations. You kind of do a lot of self-reflecting when you see a movie like this, and it does such a good job of getting you to that point to you not only have that conversation internally but externally with people in your life. That, like, I know I was in, like, when this movie came out, I wasn't in the best of personal situations either, and it didn't have that same effect on me, but I came back to it a few years later and had such a different appreciation for the film, being at a different place in my life at that point. And just, like, being able to take something different out of that film now and it quickly rose up my ranks to be one of my favorites as well. I didn't put it on my list, but I saw that it was on yours, so I kind of left it at that. And I was like, man, this is a really fun one to talk about, and it's a good way to kind of kick off because it's definitely one that you have to be willing to accept a little bit of heartbreak and also like have that internal reflection on yourself and where you're at in your life and the relationships you have with people, and you start thinking about, you know, relationships that may not have gone well and how you would have handled those situations. And you know, it was definitely one that was good for me, you know, to kind of reflect on and things that I could do better for myself, or you know, just have that thought. And that just speaks to the power of how good this movie is, that have that kind of impact to where, you know, you take something from it and you can kind of use it to either make your life better, reflect and grow. And it was so beautifully done that I'm glad you included it on this, because I hadn't thought about it in a little bit, and then as soon as you like put it on your list, I was like, man, that stuff just came flooding back to me, and I'm glad you did, because we can have a conversation like this about it. But that's part of the beauty of filmmaking. You know?
It's an interesting one, like I said, to see it at different parts in your life too, because of where you are is going to have an emotional impact with you on this. Because I was a single guy and wasn't dating or anything when this movie originally come out, and then going back and seeing it now that I've been, you know, with my wife for 16 years, married 14 years. Well, we've been married 14 years, but together 16 years, and you know, have the ins and outs of relationships and all that and stuff, and to go back and be able to look at that through a married eye instead of a single eye. But it still has a great impact on me. And yeah, it's just, if you haven't ever had a chance to see Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I highly recommend going and checking it out.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, I'm glad that you shared that one with me. The one I want to do is kind of a 90-degree turn from that. And I'll just go ahead and list my favorite movie of all time is Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. It is my favorite film. I included all three films in the original trilogy. The Hobbit, you can kind of take or leave, but those three original Lord of the Rings movies are absolutely brilliant fantasy filmmaking. You know, it's got the science fiction, it's got the action, the drama, the suspense, the lighthearted humor, a lot of boxes that tick for me in what I get enjoyment out of film in. And I say that Lord of the Rings: Return of the King is my favorite movie of all time. I consider it, in my opinion, just for my own personal criteria, the perfect movie. Like, it's a perfect film. A lot of people like to say The Two Towers is their favorite Lord of the Rings movie, and I, in a lot of senses, I agree, and I see where that makes sense. But for me, Return of the King is just this big culmination of where these films like started on this journey and winds up to this absolutely epic conclusion, and it has every element of a good film that I want in it. Like, it's beautifully shot. It holds up still to this day. Like, those films came out 20 years ago, and they're still amazing. They hold up with everything that's coming out now, and it speaks to the lasting power of that film. And it was, for the time, heavily viewed, heavily critically acclaimed. It won a ton of Oscars when it came out. Not to say that that's always the best criteria of a good film, but it's such a brilliantly told conclusion to this long, epic saga that we got that they didn't really know if we would get, you know, to that end with those books, because they took it and stretched it out over 3 films, but it got to this point, and it's so masterfully shot. The acting is incredible. The dialogue's amazing. I still tear up a little bit towards the end of it watching it, just because I get so emotionally invested in that story that, like, it's just, in my opinion, the perfect film.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love Return of the King. I love all 3 of the Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films. They're amazing to me. I have that on my list as well, and I was going to talk about it because we get to other series and stuff. There is something, like, I love Return of the King, I love Two Towers, and I may be alone on a lot of this with Fellowship of the Ring, but there's something to me about that first film in a series. So first Harry Potter, first, you know, A New Hope, and Fellowship of the Ring. There's something magical to me with that film that opens up the world and brings us into that universe. And even though, like, I don't put Fellowship and, I mean, they're all close to the same par. I put Return of the King probably a little bit over Fellowship, but there's that magic in that first opening journey of Lord of the Rings and a lot of these series that just, I don't know, there's something that sticks with me from those openings. But yeah, I do love, like, the whole, it's hard for me to say I really love one over the other when it comes to the Rings, because as a whole, it is near perfect. Like, that's beautiful. About as perfect as you could do a trilogy of films, of stories and stuff like that. Like, it was just so incredibly well shot, acted, like costume design, cinematography,
Yes.
telling the story. There's a lot of stuff that's left out of the books that's not in there, but it's like they're already 3-hour films. So if you're not going with extended editions, which I wanted to ask you, like, what is your preference when it comes to Return of the King? Is it the original theatrical or is it the extended cut?
I appreciate both differently. So that's a good topic of conversation too, because the extendeds are significantly longer. They're like an extra hour of material in there. And it's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. There's something about that original for me, though, the original season. Like, why I say it's a perfect film for me is the way I like to view trilogies and series of movies is if you can stick the landing. Stick the landing, finish it off great, because we see so many times over these films that the original, like you say, is almost always widely considered the best because it does do such a good job of setting the table for what's to come. Can they always get to the finish line? But that's what Return of the King does so absolutely brilliantly, in my opinion, is you want to talk about perfection and sticking the landing, that is it. Like, they told that story all the way through to its conclusion and just brilliantly done, brilliantly made. I do love the original. Like, I'll always remember how I felt walking out of seeing it in the theater the first time, that Return of the King, and just, it took my breath away. Like, it was so amazingly well done, and it stuck with me forever. I have been consistently chasing that particular feeling in other films that I still haven't gotten. Not to say that there aren't other films that have like a similar effect on me, but I just walked away just like in awe of what I saw, and it still sticks with me, almost 2 decades later now, and just how absolutely fantastic and brilliant that it was. And it's everything I want in a movie. It's got the lighthearted humor. It's got the action. It's got the drama, the suspense. It's got logical progression and storytelling. And Peter Jackson did such an amazing job of not only creating something brilliant with Fellowship, and you make a good point. Fellowship of the Ring is very underrated, like doesn't get a lot of love as the last 2 movies, which is rare for a trilogy because it's usually the other way around.
It's either the first or the second one gets the most love. But
right.
Yeah, with you and a lot of people, Return of the King is the
it's so fantastic. But that's just to speak of how strong that movie is, that it holds that power over the others. But that's why I included the entire series, like those 3 films, because it is such a wonderful jumping out point that really sticks the landing as well as it does. And because it does stick the landing as well as it does, that's why I hold it in such high regard. You're like, you get all the payoff you want. You get the logical conclusion. You get, everything being laid out and, ending the way it needs to. And everybody, winds up with, where they're intended to be. And it's such a beautifully told story from start to finish that I'm so happy that it stuck the landing as well as it did, and it's why it holds so much power for me personally, because these are movies that I can go to. I call them my snow day movies. If it's cold and snowy and I'm not leaving the house, I might watch all 3 back to back. I love those movies that much. I can't say that about too many other types of movies that still to this day, I have no problem watching 9.5, 10 hours worth and just killing a day to watch.
Well, Lord of the Rings is a top one because they've had several re-releases back in the theater because they did different cuts. They do extended cut. There's anniversaries. They're the main ones that get me like, do I go back to the theater and watch it? Because I want to see it, but do I want to do 3 hours through 4 hours, 4 hours and go through all of them? Because it's like, I've seen them so many times. I'm like, I want to go back and see it in theaters again. I want that experience in theater and everything else. Like, do I do it? Do I do it? And like, I'm so mixed, but it's the only one. Like, the Batman was just re-released, and a lot of movies get released, but Lord of the Rings is a top one. When I see them, like, oh, okay, do I go see it? Do I make time for it?
But that speaks to the power of the films, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like, it has that grasp on me that I'm like, a lot of times I get a little daunted. Like, we talk about, people's attention spans and runtimes. Like, people can't pay attention to a movie over 2.5 hours. Those movies are well over 3 hours, and I lose myself in it every time I watch it. I don't mind the length of the storytelling in the movies when it's in a way that makes sense and it keeps my attention the entire time. I can tell you right now, every time I go and watch one of these movies, my phone on silent, face down. I'll come back to however many notifications I have to come back to after I watch it, because it does such a good job of keeping my attention to where I am enthralled in this story that they're telling. And that's why it holds the top spot for me, because I can still come back to it. I'm not bored of it. Like, I will come back and I just get lost in it all over again, and it just reminds me how much I love film and why I love it as much as I do, because it's a perfect representation of that for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lord of the Rings is probably that trilogy of films. Of course, in the book, like, it's one book, it's 3 books, depending on which version you read. But, as a film trilogy, it is my favorite series of films, trilogy of films that I've ever watched. Like, it is, to me, perfection in movie making. Like, they took a kind of a hard story to adapt, because Tolkien put so much depth and created his own language and did so much stuff with it. And like I said, they left some stuff out even that the extended editions didn't hit. But I mean, you're not going to have a perfect one-to-one adaptation. I think that is as perfect of an adaptation, as close to a perfect adaptation as you could possibly get with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Like, we know how The Hobbit went, that we know there was a lot of studio involvement, and they stretched the much thinner book into 3 films when it could have been 1 or 2. Like, we're even hearing potentially now that the Gollum movie is going to be split into 2 movies, so we'll see just exactly how that goes. But just what they did with the original trilogy of the Lord of the Rings, with Fellowship, Towers, and Return, it was brilliant. It's one of the best examples of filmmaking that I can talk about, just from every aspect that they did, and skyrocketed Weta to everyone knows. Like, if you got them involved with costuming or props or special effects or something else, that it's going to be good. I've got Sting hanging up on my wall in my office at home with the One Ring on a necklace hanging from it as well, because I love the Lord of the Rings movie so much, and that's part of everything. And I go back and I watch them as often as I can. Again, they're a big time commitment. You're looking upwards to 9 to 12 hours, depending if you're watching the theatricals, if you're doing the extended cuts. I have appreciation for both. Like, I will have that just feeling in love for the original theatrical runs. But the extended editions do a great job of filling out more of the story and adding more to it. And but I will still probably always prefer the theatrical runs, but I love the extended editions as well.
Yeah, they don't take anything away in my opinion, but I know a lot of people struggle to watch films for that long, but this one, in my opinion, is well worth the time and investment, at least as far as my own criteria goes. Yeah.
I'm going to jump into one that's high up on my list, and as baseball guys, I think most baseball people, you got the Major League Series for the comedy and humor and the laughter, and absolutely love those. But Field of Dreams, just being so enthralled with baseball as I am, and then of course to the late, recently deceased James Earl Jones, like, that was such an amazing baseball film. Like, Kevin Costner, everybody involved in that. It's it's another big emotional impact movie. Like, it's about a father wanting to have the son wanting to have catch with his father one last time, and he builds this baseball field in honor of him and everything else, and you get such a deep emotional impact to the love of the game, but also parenting and father-son relationships, and there's so much depth and love to this movie, and it's one of the perfect baseball films that's ever been made.
Yeah, that one definitely hits on an emotional note. I know for both of us, both of us not having our fathers around too, so it holds an extra special meaning.
It hits
for
harder
both of us.
now.
It does now for sure. But even before then, we could relate to that film too. Like, I take away from that film, appreciating the relationships that you have while you have them, kind of thing. And like, don't take any of that for granted. But yeah, it's such as much as it is a baseball movie, it's more of an emotional, an emotional trip they take you on, because, it's, for several reasons. Like, I know we talked about wanting to take the bucket list trip to, Iowa to see the real field that's still up there that you can go and visit and actually throw throw baseballs
stay
around
in the
on.
farmhouse too.
You can stay at the house, which is incredible, but it's had such a lasting impact on so many people that it's one of the best representative sports movies of all time, because it has that message behind it, and because it's so well acted, so many big names. I know you mentioned James Earl Jones. It's got Kevin Costner as the main actor as well. It's got Ray Liotta, who recently a couple years ago passed as well. So a lot of big name people in that film, but it really sends a powerful message to people that if you haven't seen it, it's definitely one to recommend too, because they do such a good job of hitting all those emotional notes and making you feel something when you watch it that's really powerful in a movie.
Yeah, because it's a baseball film, but kind of baseball is secondary to the relationships and the emotion and everything that's going through. And yeah, it's hard to find people who are big into baseball that haven't ever seen Field of Dreams or doesn't absolutely love Field of Dreams. Even when they started doing the MLB series there, of still having walked through the cornfield and come out, that just brings back of waves of emotions. Even it's like seeing King Griffey Sr. and Jr. come out and having a catch out there. Like, it's my favorite player, our favorite player of all time, in King Griffey Jr., seeing him come out of the cornfield and doing that with his dad. I'm like, God, just like a gut punch, bringing me back to the emotions I felt watching the film. But like, it's just one of the most perfect baseball films you could do. But baseball's kind of secondary to it. It's about the emotional impact. And especially, like I said, we both unfortunately lost our dads, and watching it now has a different impact as it did before. It had a big impact on me before, but now it brings up a lot of emotions about my dad and everything else. So it hits me in the feels a lot differently now, and it's one I still try to go back and watch quite a lot, but it does get me a bit emotional when I watch it because of losing my dad to cancer a few years ago.
But that's one of the beautiful things about films, right? Like, it can have a different impact on you where you are in your life, but you could take different things away from it based on those experiences, right? And that's what's so powerful about film and why we love it as much as we do, because I'm okay with having my heart broken when I watch a movie. I want to have that emotional feeling. Like, I'm not a robot. I can feel and process emotions. You know what I mean? Like, and that one's definitely a gut punch if you have any type of soul or heart. You know what I mean? If you've dealt with any type of loss of, family or close friends or whatever, you can kind of relate to this, and like wanting to have that, not only that conversation one last time, or, it is something as representative as, just a game of catch. And that's where a lot of father and sons bond, out in the yard throwing a baseball around. It's a really strong representation of a father-son type bond, but you can apply that to so many other relationships that you have in your life. And that's one of the, I say fun loosely when I say it here, but it's one of the fun parts about filmmaking is you can go on that emotional journey and, like you said, just feel it at different like have different feelings from it in different, times of your life. And that speaks to how well that film is made, because you can take several different things from it. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
I really do. Now, I know we're getting sappy, but I kind of want to transition to something silly to kind of palate cleanse ourselves. I know we talked about Jim Carrey a little earlier, but I want to talk about his best comedic role, in my opinion, and that's the film Dumb and Dumber. Mm-hmm. Dumb and Dumber is still one of my favorites. It's one of my top 2 or 3 favorite comedies of all time. It's so stupid, like, on its premise. The jokes are really goofy, but it's so funny and smart written. Like, this is a movie that I still find myself quoting to this day. Like, a big group of my friends, when we say goodbye to each other, will say, big gulps, huh? Well, see you later. And I think that's one of the fun parts about filmmaking that makes a film great is, can you quote the film afterwards? Does it have that quotability? And Dumb and Dumber, in my opinion, is one of the most quotable films of all time, because there's so many things that you can pull from it, and it hits a lot of my sense of humor. It hits a lot of like fun. I could just put that on no matter what's going on in my life. It's just a laugh for 2 hours.
Yeah, I think even it was Trap or something else we watched recently where people are going in areas that they shouldn't be in, and I still make the joke, it's okay, I'm a limo driver.
Right.
Like, he's allowed to go. Like, it's got some of the most quotable and also kind of the most, I want to almost say, shocking performances, because at that time, no one really knew Jeff Daniels as a comedic actor. And it was a full-blown, like, he's playing this real doofus character, and you never really had seen him like that. He's known for doing more dramatic and serious roles and other things, and God, I still love watching interviews of, like, him and Jim together on the couch and talking about how he got into being Harry, and, like, he just basically scrambles his brains, and then he just falls into, like, being Harry. Like, yeah, they both gave such great performances. It's still quoted so much. Like, I do the limo driver a lot, and then you hear the Austria. All right, put a shrimp on the barbie.
Yeah, it's just so many fun things that you could take from it, and it's so goofy and so silly and so stupid that it works. It's in a way that works as a film, right? Like you have these guys in just the most absurd of circumstances that take something so silly as somebody losing a briefcase and just being good natured and, for very not altruistic reasons, he wants to wind up with this woman. Like he goes across the country to return this briefcase to her. And in his mind, this is a brilliant plan. Like what could possibly go wrong? And all these other shenanigans that happen in this film that have no business working. And it sounds absurd on its premise, but it works and it's funny. It's hilarious. It's quotable. It's so much fun. That's why I love it as much as I do. I will put that on and if I'm scrolling through looking for something to watch and I see a TV station is playing it, I'll put it on, hands down, and I'll watch it and I'll laugh for however long I feel like sitting down and watching that. And that's one thing about a film that I think is so, that I can appreciate so much is its returnability. Do you have to sit and watch the whole thing? I don't have to sit and watch the whole thing. I can watch it for 20 to 30 minutes and just get a couple laughs and I can go on back about my day and come back to it when I need to. And for whatever reason in my brain that makes so much sense as to why it's a good film. If you can come back to it and you don't have to sit there and commit all your time to watching it, you can watch it in bits and pieces and get a little bit of enjoyment out of and come back to it when you're ready. And I think that's the staying power of how good that movie is.
And I think a lot of comedies do have a good rewatchability, but for those slapsticky type of comedies to still have rewatchability 20, 30 years down the line is a big deal. Like they don't last, like stuff like Monty Python and Dumb and Dumber, and I'd even put like a lot of the Mel Brooks stuff with Spaceballs and Blazing Saddles, for them to do the humor and things in the way they do to last as long as they have is a true testament to how good the films were, because you can have slapsticky comedies you can watch over and over again, but to last that long means there was really something special to it.
For sure. And it's so funny. It's so quotable. It's just everything I like in a comedy. It does really, really well. It's hands down my favorite Jim Carrey role. That was done in a year that was incredible for film for him anyway, because it came out the same year as, I believe it came out the same year as Ace Ventura and The Mask. So you're talking like in a year, it was The Mask, Ace Ventura, and Dumb and Dumber. You want to talk about an incredible year for an actor?
Just home run after home run.
Yeah, just hit after hit after hit was an incredible year for him. But that, in my opinion, is leaps and bounds above every other one of his roles. And it's just so funny. I like full body laugh every time I watch that movie, because it's so absurd. It has no business working, but it does. And it's just got so many things. I could rattle off the entire film from memory. I can't do that with any other movie. Like I can do the entire dialogue of the movie, watching it and just quote it. And like I have friends that can do the same thing. That's powerful. Like that's not something insignificant. If you can quote an entire movie word for word, that's impressive. Like, cause I can't do that with any other film that I can think of off the top of my head. It just goes to the staying power of the movie and why it just holds so much meaning to me. Cause it's just, it's an easy mood lifter. I'll put that on. I'll laugh. I'll feel instantly better. And that there's something powerful. Yeah, there's something powerful about that. Is it the best film ever made? No, but it's a favorite for me.
It's also what made this sequel after so long be such a disappointment.
Sure,
because they try. That's one of the prime examples of trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice, like doing something. The second Dumb and Dumber 2 just didn't work.
No,
like they tried to do what happened then, but it's a different time and they're in different places, and they tried to retread a lot of stuff, and it just didn't work. No. But that just also just shows how good the original was when the second just couldn't even come close to it.
Right, and it just speaks to the staying power of the first one that people still hold it in as high as regard as they do. Fantastic film, love it, can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, another trilogy of films that I have really high on my list that would be up there with the Lord of the Rings, but for different reasons, is the Back to the Future trilogy. Like this was such an amazing group of films that was so unique and original to the time it came out as well, and then you skyrocketed Michael J. Fox, but it's pretty quotable as well. But each film is, they're not the greatest, comparing to like Lord of the Rings, like when you go to cinematography and acting, it's silly, it's goofy, it's over the top, but doing the blending of the past and the present and going to the Old West, and how they brought the first movie into the second movie but doing things differently, like it's just so, there's nothing else like it. there's just nothing else like the Back to the Future trilogy. Like, it's so much fun. There's, you even got the actors are still asked about it to this day. Every time anybody talks to him is about Back to the Future. Like, it's one of the best trilogies ever made, and that should never be retouched, remade. Like, no one should ever try to attempt to do Back to the Future again, because they just perfected it in a different way. Like I said, Lord of the Rings and other films, like it's quirky, it's silly, it's funny, it's got some bad acting here and there, but it's just so much fun. Like, it just had this impact on me as a kid watching all three of the Back to the Futures, that they were just transported me into a different place in a different world, where I just let myself go and how they were doing it. And like, each one offered something so different from one another, while still it's telling the same time traveling, story, even when they, like I said, in the second one, revisited the first one. But I was like, I haven't really seen that before. Like, for the age of the film, it looks pretty seamless most of the time. And also to go back, like, everyone was counting down for when we got to the future, and do we have this? Well, we do have a team in Miami now who could have won, and then Jaws, 6D or whatever it was, and everything else. But it's just such a fun trilogy. I can just turn that one on anytime I see it on TV. It's Back to the Future. I'm like, all right, I'm watching Back to the Future.
Yeah, Robert Zemeckis did a really great job of, manning this trilogy, and it's so iconic. One of the true testaments of how, like, good a film series can be is its ability to hold up over time, right? You see so many classic films that are called classics for a reason, because they can be watched several decades later and still have the same impact. You talk about, cliche films like The Godfather and stuff like that are going to be good from now until the end of time. And I think Back to the Future falls into that. Like, those movies came out almost 40 years ago now. Like, next year will be the 40-year anniversary of the first Back to the Future film, which is insane to think about. But I recently watched this, at least the first two films, with a group of friends that hadn't seen it yet, and they loved it. Like, and that's a true hold up of, a testament to how good that movie is. If, 4 decades later, you can still come back to it, and people that have never seen it, and they're like, I really enjoyed this. As cheesy and, quote unquote corny as a lot of it can be, like, it still holds up well. Like, it's a really well told story. It's an absurd premise, like the guy going back to alter his life, but dealing with the potential ramifications of doing so. Like, can he save himself? Like had he gone sideways, like, he may not have existed, that kind of thing. And you deal with a lot of that. And if it's being referenced in other films, it has staying power. Like, if you look back at, like, Avengers Endgame, where they talk about going back to the future, like, going back in time to fixing things. And they kind of reference it in that movie directly. And it's just like, that just tells you the type of cultural impact a film can have, and the staying power that a film can have, that you can kind of reference it in other things and it makes sense. And it's such a fun trilogy of movies. I would say the third one is probably the weakest of the three. And I think widely accepted about that, but the first two are fantastic. They're both really good movies.
It's still fun as a whole trilogy altogether. Like, taken as a whole, it's still so much fun, even though, third one's a little bit weaker, but they were trying to have fun going back to the Old West and giving you the time-traveling train and everything. But, it was a little more silly than the rest of it, but I still had a great time with it. And like you said, the legacy it's had, like, especially look at the DeLorean. Like, look what it's done for the DeLorean, because it was kind of a more, I guess, at the time, mediocre car. Wasn't selling that well, doesn't it? And they ended up, because originally I think it was going to be like a refrigerator or something else crazy that was going to be the time traveling device. And they used the DeLorean that had such a unique look. And like, anybody who sees that car, it's instantly, that's Back to the Future. Yeah. Whether it's dolled up to look like it at all, if they just see a DeLorean, that's Back to the Future. Yeah,
and that's the lasting cultural impact that it's had, and that's what makes it so great, right? Is that, if you have things that you can directly tie, that you see out and about, to a particular film, that just goes to show how good it is and the type of impact that it has. I mean, people still talk about those films to this day, right? And it's good that it has that effect on you. I love the Back to the Future movies as well. I didn't include it in my list, but they're absolutely ones that I'll go back and, like, watch and quote. And the fun part is to go and look, like you said, when they crossed those date thresholds, did we have everything they said they did? And how different does it look? And how much was it a little too over-the-top cartoony that they obviously didn't think we would be there? But you never know if they were going to be right about it, right? So,
even got so many years later, like Nike put out the or was it Reebok? Nike or Reebok? I forget now. And that put out the self-lacing shoes as a fun little throwback to it. And we don't have our hoverboards yet, but we're getting close.
Kinda,
We got some of the drone type of things that they're doing. But yeah, there's just so many people who still, if they talk about what they're waiting in the future, like, where's my hoverboard? Give me my hoverboard.
Yeah, I want my flying car and my hoverboard.
And how many guys in their 30s and 40s, I would say it'd be over 80 to 90%. If you asked them, do you want a DeLorean? Yes. All of them would say yes. I still want a DeLorean to this day. Give me a DeLorean.
Yeah, absolutely. DeLorean. If the people that are making it talk to us, but yeah, and that's a good representation of, films that you like. I want to move over to another one of mine, and it's on both of our lists, and for various reasons I won't include the second and third films because I think they're a little weaker in the trilogy, but the original Matrix film for me is just revolutionary when it came out. Like it took science fiction filmmaking to like a whole other level and just completely just blew the doors open to a genre that had already done so much over time. But like that movie is so incredible, so incredibly well done. We still talk about taking the blue pill or the red pill. We're living in a simulation. How often do you hear that? And that's from a movie like The Matrix. And that one really speaks to my love of science fiction and telling a story in a way that's over the top, in a way that you look at it and go, you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if that was really true, that kind of thing. And it's so visually, especially for its time, just absolutely stunning for the way the movie was shot, with the the special effects of everybody still does the dodging of the bullets, and all the different fight scenes. I know kung fu, like all the different stuff that you can take away from that movie, but that staying power is really what has a grasp on me and why I love the film as much as I do.
Yeah, how many hundreds of films did we have after The Matrix came out that did the bullet time, that have done slow-mo? Zack Snyder is big on doing the big slow-mo action sequences and stuff as well. Like, it boosted out a new way of doing films. That bullet time, the camera tricks and stuff they did there is now a more standard way of kind of doing these big action films, and that's been adopted by so many people, even if they're making fun of it, if they're using it. Like, it had such an impact on the industry, on sci-fi, on everything, because it was cinematography wise, it looked fantastic. You hadn't seen anything like it. Action wise, you hadn't seen action like that much. Like, it was just, okay, they're walking on the walls and they're flying. Like, that's where the second and third one were more disappointments, because they went more CG heavy with a lot of the action. And we love the wire work and everything that they did with the original, and they kind of got away from that and lost it a little bit. But yeah, the first Matrix did have such an impact. Like, it was a story we hadn't seen before. It was unique and interesting to the sci-fi realm, and what they did with set pieces and action, and just everything was so unique and different. Like, it does have a sync pattern. Like, they're re-releasing again, and I was like, am I going to go see that in theaters? I want to go re-see that in theaters. And there's very few films past like Lord of the Rings and other stuff that I say, like, I want to go back and revisit in a theater as soon as it comes out, because it's like it had that such impact to me. Because I remember watching on a VHS tape, like, back then. It's how long it's been, be able to watch a Matrix on VHS, and it just was so unique that I still don't think I've seen anything else like it since then, even with all the other Matrix films. Like, it was just had its own uniqueness to it that was just so brilliantly done. And yeah, it just looked gorgeous. There was no one out of place with the actors. Like, everyone fit it so well. Like, it, and of course it was gigantic to bring in Keanu Reeves back out of, kind of where he was huge and then kind of wasn't seen in a whole lot. He did a bunch of romantic comedies and did other things, and then The Matrix was like, all right, Keanu's back in a gigantic way.
But yeah, like you said, it's got its own uniqueness, but it's such a genre-defining film that it really it helps you appreciate the art of filmmaking. Like you said, it did it in such a way that was so practical but looked absolutely spectacular, that influenced an entire generation. Like you said, a genre of those types of science fiction action type films with a very smart and well told story too. Like, it was such a well done, well acted. The dialogue was fine in it as well. A little over the top in ways, but it's science fiction. It's meant to be over the top, but it's done in enough of a practical way that visually was incredible. It I walked out of that theater seeing it for the first time just going wow, like my mind was blown seeing a film like that, and having that immediate type of impact on me is something that lasts for me personally for a while, and that's why I include it on a list like this, because of that impact that it had on me not only then, but I can still go back and watch it now and still enjoy it. Like you said, they're re-releasing it in theaters. I may go see it again. Like, it's one of those that is really fun to go back and watch. And, I love to go Mr. Anderson, just so good. Like the agents and, just the battles and him like coming into his own and realizing he is the one and proving himself worthy of it and believing it in himself that everybody thinks you are, but until you actually believe it in yourself. It's a really well done hero story at the end where it's like, like they tell you you're destined for this. You don't really believe it until you do. And then when you do, it's this really powerful thing and you become this unstoppable monster that, can, win the day at the end for humanity, and it's a ton of fun, man. I really love that movie.
I still have a few times now that when me and my daughters have had Nerf wars that I have held up to stop the bullets, like it's still there, like
still there. I still want the ability to, if there was a way you could plug me into something and teach me all of the world's languages, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Well, it brought up a whole lot of stuff. Like, would you do this if you had a chance to learn every language or learn how to be a pilot or do this stuff about being able to plug in? Like, is that going too far, or is that being like, hey, I can understand every word that's being spoken to me in every language and read everything and know kung fu and be able to fly a airplane and a helicopter? Like, would you want to have that much knowledge be plugged into you, or is that a sacrifice? Like, oh, that's going too far? Because it opened up so much conversation about just technology and how far it can or cannot go if we're in a simulation, but also just there's so much conversations that came out of it. Plus, just it did change how films were made. Like there was a huge change in the film industry after that movie came out, and it's still having a huge impact on the film industry to today.
Absolutely brilliant movie. I'm not surprised they made both of our lists for sure.
Now, I'm going to bring up a couple movies that kind of go along with The Matrix and how they had an impact, and that's Aliens and Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I'm going to put those together. Like, Alien is one of my favorite films. Fantastic. It is one of the best horror films ever made. It had so much tension. It had so much just... It's an amazing film to watch. But Aliens and Terminator 2, when you talk about sequels and impact sequels can have on a film franchise, like, those two are the gold standard that everybody talks about because they were simply incredible. Like you took the horror aspect of Alien and you brought in action and more sci-fi and a bigger budget, and like it was an incredible film to watch. And then Terminator 2, like that just was still people talk about to this day because of the impact it had on cinema itself. Like it was skyrocketed even Schwarzenegger even more. Like he was still at his peak and at his top there, but like that is one of his definite greatest films ever made because of the action sequences were so good and the depth that went to its story about, we're bringing the Terminator back, but now he's good. He's trying to protect John Connor, and you get such a different layer to this story than we got in Terminator because, the first Terminator was all about he's there to kill Sarah Connor, and it's more horror and more thriller, and you're going through that. And Terminator 2 did the same thing as like Aliens did, of course, with James Cameron, with both of them, bringing action and just more, just brought those franchises to a different level.
Yeah, two incredible films that are still being made versions of today. Like We just talked about them putting an anime Terminator Zero that just came out on Netflix, which is absolutely fantastic. If you haven't watched it, check it out. But that's the lasting power that these franchises have had. We literally just go back in our archives. We just reviewed the new Alien Romulus film that came out this year. That's the staying power of those films. And if those movies aren't as good as they are, we're not having those conversations today about new projects that are even coming out. And those are the two standard bearers for sequels and how to get them right, is Aliens and Terminator 2. Terminator 2, in a lot of people's opinions, is even better than the first one. And the first one is really good. But it did big budget so well, so brilliantly. It was revolutionary at its time. It was the most expensive film ever made when it came out in the early 90s. They put a lot of money into like the special effects budget and the, you know, everything that came into it made making a big film successful. Like, and a lot of people took that inspiration from that film, and you get the big, grandiose, big, high-budget blockbusters that, you know, studios back then were scared to invest that much money into a project because they didn't know what the return on their investment would be. And then it just blew the doors off the box office and made a ton of money that it's still, I want to say, if you adjust for inflation, it's still one of the top 15 to 20 movies of all time, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that, but just the impact that it had is still felt to this day. And you get those big special effects budgets thanks to films like that, you know, invest so heavily in that. Now you can have the conversation of whether people are taking it too far in some cases or it's too over the top, but you don't even get to that point without a film like Terminator 2 and just how brilliant it was. And it's definitely one that I go back and watch repeatedly for how good it still is to this day. And even the effects then, like, you can tell they're from the 90s, but they still hold up pretty well. It still looks good. It still looks believable. And that's just the staying power of that film, and I see why you included it on your list as well.
Yeah, because I got to put those because they're the definition of how to do a sequel.
Sure.
Putting them at kind of the same level. And they are so extremely quotable between Aliens and Terminator 2. I mean, how many times you still hear people saying, I'll be back.
Yeah.
And everything else, like, it's still being quoted everywhere. But it was the perfection of doing a sequel.
Yeah,
like,
it's how to do it right.
God, where sequels might even be better than the first, but it's in different ways. Like I said, Alien and Terminator were both more horror thriller, while Aliens and Terminator 2 gave us the action spectacle with a little bit of the thriller horror elements and stuff too. Like, they were just done so brilliantly and so much fun, and I revisit them often, especially when, you know, maybe I'm in a bad mood or something else and I just want to watch some big explosions and some crazy action. Those are my go-tos when I need some, like, get my action fix on something. Going back to those.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the staying power of those movies, right? They took an original, really good, really well-made, beloved film and took it to a whole other level in a way that worked, in a way that was practical, a way that makes sense. It was a good story on top of it. That's what we want when you're going back to that well, right? We want you to take it to the next level and make it better. And so few instances of that being true. Like, I just spent 20 minutes talking about how much I loved Lord of the Rings for doing that just as well as they did. But it's because of movies like Aliens and Terminator 2 that we're able to take a movie and expand upon it and do it even better. And, like, those guys really set the blueprint on how to do it right. So you're absolutely right. They're fantastic movies in their own right, but they hold an even higher meaning when you talk about what they mean to, extended universes and films that we see now where stories are interconnected and they're expanded upon in ways that are done well, and we get it because of films like this. So I love that you put that on your list.
And I still have to laugh because we had the actor who played John Connor came to our area and had some controversy because he went to Myers and he released lobsters to try to save him. Like, oh, we got John Connor in there. Where's the Terminator? Like, right. We're in for doom and gloom and stuff. But yeah, they're just, like I said, that's the pinnacle of still, I think when people are looking and making a sequel to something, they look at those films.
Yeah, you throw those in the Godfather Part 2 in there, and those are kind of the standard bearers for good reason, but those are proof that you can take a movie, make a sequel, and make it work. And that's the standard that we try to hold all these other films to that not everybody gets, but it just speaks to how good those movies are. Now, I want to kind of pivot from that. We talk about expanded universes. We're several minutes into this episode at this point, and we have yet to touch on the MCU. So the MCU has just completely dominated the last decade or so at the box office. and given us so many brilliant movies that I feel we would be remiss if we didn't visit that and touch on some of our favorite movies that do actually legitimately wind up in our favorite movies list because of how well they're done. And there was one film in particular that wound up on both of our lists. In my opinion, it's still the best MCU film, and it falls a little bit in the early to middle part of the MCU, and that's Captain America and the Winter Soldier. Which, for lack of a better term, is not your standard superhero film, but more of this political thriller that
Espionage.
it kind of molded into more of like a spy thriller than an actual like superhero, going big and, big battles and blowing stuff up. It was more of a psychological type of film that I really, really enjoy to this day, and it's still number one for me. There are some films that are creeping up on it and like coming up on that list for me that I could pair in with it as well when we talk about the MCU, but that movie in particular was just so good.
Yeah, Captain America the Winter Soldier is one of the best. And again, it's a sequel that they did so well, and I still think that original look in design and introduction to Sebastian Stan's Winter Soldier when he came out, he just looked menacing. He looked incredible. The action sequences were so well done like that. I wish they would go back to that look some, just because he looked just amazing as the Winter Soldier then. And yeah, just like you said, it was a political thriller, espionage, spy film that, kind of bordered on the line of, is it still a comic book movie? Is it, action, suspense, thriller? Like it hit so many good levels. That did something different than they had been doing in the MCU so far. And yeah, it's just written so well, directed so well, acted so well. Like it's just so well done overall. Like I said, I absolutely love the look of the Winter Soldier, and that's one of the best designs they've done for any character in live action. Was how the Winter Soldier originally, I mean, his look in the last few appearances was okay. There's nothing that has yet to top just how he was introduced.
And if you take the whole Captain America aspect out of the film itself, like just the fact that he's Captain America, it's still a really, really freaking good movie. Like at the end of the day, it's a smart written film. Like I said, it's a great espionage type film. It could have worked as a Bond movie. Like it really could have. Like it had the same aesthetic of you love from Bond films.
It's like MCU's Bond.
Yeah, and it's so good. I'm really hoping that the next Captain America movie that comes out next year looks a little along that same line, like maybe
they've talked that they went back and
ramped up a little bit, which has me very excited to see that too. But it stands out amongst the rest of the MCU films. It's the most unique in my opinion, just because the way they tell the story is so different from literally everything else they do. Like you even take the first Captain America movie where he becomes Captain America, like that's over the top comic book movie stuff, and then you just do almost a 180 into this like gritty political crime drama thriller type film that it becomes. But it's done in a way that's so good, so practical, but it has ramifications for the rest of the MCU. You get your introduction of the Black Panther in that film. You get really the first real mentions of Wakanda in that film. Like there's so many like things that branched out from it that are so good and so well done. You've got cameos from other villains. You get a very brief appearance from the UFC's George St. Pierre as his character that he plays in it, but you get, I'm forgetting the main actor who's the villain in this film, who's like that upper guy in S.H.I.E.L.D. who winds up being the bad guy of the film, and it's done in such a way that it's so good and so well done and presents the very real threat.
Robert Redford?
It was Robert Redford, thank you. I was blanking on the name, but he's fantastic in this film too, and it poses this very real threat of Hydra and this secret organization that you get introduced to in Captain America, but you see how they've infiltrated everything in this film, and there's some really awesome fight scenes. It's still got one of my favorite fight scenes in any MCU film, in just the simple elevator fight with, Frank Grillo's character as well, and just that real quick like fight scene in an elevator. It's just so well done. So
that
smart.
Has become an absolute iconic scene in filmmaking.
Brilliant.
Like if anybody other film, even I think there was a film this year or last year that had an elevator fight scene, and everyone's like, oh, that didn't have anything on Captain America, but
yeah,
but it's become an iconic scene.
It's the staying power of that of that film, but it's my favorite MCU film. I have a couple other favorite MCU movies that I included on this. I put a top 3 MCU films for me like on my list because they're all really well done and really good stories. I put Avengers Infinity War on there. That's my favorite Avengers movie. Avengers Endgame's great. Top 2 highest grossing film of all time. I thought Infinity War as a film was the better of the 2 films. Like, so good. At the end of the day, you get the bad guys winning, which Thanos gets the snap off, and you're just left with this half the universe's population is gone.
It's like the only MCU film that really left you with dread and everything else. Like, hey, half the universe is dead.
The staying power of that film was it was legitimately quiet when we left the theater. Like, that had a lasting impact on me, and why I think it's such a brilliant. Not to speak of, I don't want to dive too far into the film because we got some like other things that we want to touch on, but that one was up there for me. And then for me, Spider-Man: No Way Home was my favorite of the 3 Tom Holland Spider-Man films. It's the third one, which surprising is holds up as well as it does, but it was so much fun. One of my favorite theater experiences was going to see this film because the audience was so invested and it had a grip on everybody, and you get the cameos, and they took what we were hoping to get with Doctor Strange in the multiverse and made a multiversal film that was so brilliantly done, such a wonderful story. It's got the humor, it's got the heartbreak. You get him finally losing May and having that heartbreaking Spider-Man moment that he never had up until then.
Yeah, getting that twist has not been that he loses May.
Yeah, and you get the brilliant returns of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, and it sparked this whole, can they get their own finish to their own stories? Are they going to be in Secret Wars? There was so much fun stuff that they set up in that film that so brilliantly told and brilliantly well done. And it's just, that one is a lot of comic book fun in a theater. And that speaks to like how fun going and seeing a movie in a theater like that and having the audience in the palm of your hand like that one did. The cheering, the laughing, the the applause. It got a standing ovation when I went and saw it in the theater. It was that much fun that everybody had such a good time and enjoying it, that those film going and viewing experiences really stick with me, that I love.
Yeah, No Way Home and Endgame were my 2 probably favorite theatrical experiences, just because of like when No Way Home, when we're getting the portals opening and we know that it's got to Andrew or Toby's coming, like the theater was so quiet. Everyone's on the edge of their seat and they're just waiting and waiting. And then you see Andrew come out and there's cheers, and then they stop because he's got his mask on and everything. Then he ripped his mask off and it's just like
cheer again.
Just like screams and yells, and everyone was so, because I mean, we're big sticklers. Like, we like quiet and everyone being in it. For dramatic films and other stuff out, don't want a whole lot of talking, but when those scenes happen, it's like, yes, let's celebrate and have it. And then you get the pause, and then you get Toby showing up and everyone's got the same scream. Same with Endgame. You got Captain with the with Mjolnir and everything, and like everyone's just like, wait, everyone's coming through the portals. Oh, now it's Captain, and he's got the hammer, and he's using it, and he says the thing. And like, those were just such amazing, memorable theatrical moments that we're probably going to have something like that in Secret Wars that comes up. But yeah, those have an experience in the theater just sticks with you. But I will still put Winter Soldier, just because it was so different and it was just so well acted and well written, that it was just an incredible film. And yeah, No Way Home and Infinity War, because like I said, Infinity War left us with, well, they've actually lost. Like, the good guys have lost, and we don't know where we're going to go forward from this. And then, of course, you're a big, comic reader, but as from the movie itself, like, how are we going to move forward on that? And
that's why they did such a good job with it, though. That's the thing, because you don't know how they're coming back. And if you can put yourself, like, we know what happened, obviously, and how they redeemed and wound up winning the day and bringing everybody back in the brilliant film that was Endgame in its own right. But what I loved was the dark grittiness of this very real existential threat of Thanos, and they couldn't figure him out. Or the heartbreak of being so close when he said, you should have gone for the head, and he snaps his fingers. You're just like, oh my God, they were so close and they missed it. They actually missed it. He won. What are they going to do? Like, that was so well done. And it made so much sense. And it still had its brilliant, cheerable moments in that film where, you get heartbreak with the beginning and, losing characters right away. And you're just like, oh my God, what's going to happen in this film? And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about our favorite movies, and including that, because for the better part of a decade, that just speaks to the staying power of comic book movies now, that so many great, incredible films were made that has had this grip on how films are shot now. And it's so influential in filmmaking and putting these large interconnected stories that even they themselves have had trouble replicating, that they did such a brilliant job in making these movies that you can't not talk about them when you're talking about your favorite films, because they've had such a lasting impact for the last decade plus that there's still big deals moving forward. And for something to have staying power like that, like it's had, and have been so successful, the billions upon billions of dollars that these movies make, you'd be remiss not to put it on there.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to stay in the comic book realm because I would put Tim Burton's Batman and Batman Returns kind of high up on my list of favorites, just because of the impact it had on me as a kid and what I saw with Batman. But I've got to put Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight in the top list, because Christopher Nolan, the guy, just is an amazing filmmaker.
Absolutely.
But you couple in with Heath Ledger's just unbelievable performance as the Joker in there, and with Two-Face and how they handled all that. Like, it's one of the best comic book movies made because of, and it did have a bigger impact because of Heath Ledger passing away and stuff, but I mean, he was so brilliant. It was one of the best comic book movies I've seen, and the best thing that DC has done by far was The Dark Knight, because it was just so good. Even though, you know, some people have mixed reactions to the final of Christopher Nolan's films, and Batman Begins is still good, but there's just something, again, the power of a sequel. The Dark Knight was just like so good.
Yeah, that film had such a grip on like the cultural zeitgeist at the time. It was everywhere, and people were, that's one of the films that I genuinely remember multiple people that I knew went and saw the film in the theater multiple times. Like, it's one of the highest grossing films of all time for a reason. Like, it had such a grip on everyone. Like, it was such a big part. A lot of it had to do with the, you know, understanding the tragic passing of Heath Ledger and the impact that it had on the marketing of the film. But that's not to take away from the incredible performance that he did give in this. Like, his interpretation of the Joker is a lot of people's favorite for that reason. Like, he loses himself in this character, and it's such a brilliant portrayal of the Joker that we had seen up to this point that was almost always presented as like a, not goofy, aloof, but more of the cartoony, like crack a joke kind of one. And this is one where you see more of the darker, more sinister, chaotic Joker that we got a lot of in the comics that we hadn't seen a ton of on film yet. And you get that dark, gritty, like, some people just want to see the world burn type Joker, and it was so brilliantly well made. And it's one that I will watch over and over again for that reason, because it's so brilliantly done. And it's not just a brilliant comic book movie, it's just a brilliant film, period. Like you said, Christopher Nolan is so good at making these big, epic masterpiece type films, and he's done that with so many other films, but this is really, in my opinion, his best work. And I love that movie so much that, you know, it's gonna stay probably on my top 5 or 6 movies of all time as a standalone film, let alone part of a trilogy. It gets so brilliantly well done. I'm glad you included it.
And of course, a lot of people have some issues with Christian Bale's Batman because of the voice he did for Batman. And I get, and he's trying to differentiate the best he can. Yeah. It's more of the lip movement when he's Batman, because it's so out here like this, and like everyone kind of has that issue. But I think it also gave us such great depth in that movie between his Bruce and between his Batman. And but again, back to Heath Ledger, just it's that slow, kind of more subtle descent into madness that we get with this Joker, because we get that he's a guy who's kind of knows what he's doing. He's playing the mobsters against each other, and he's playing these games and stuff. But you get, because as the movie goes on, you get more of the licking lips, you get more of the slow descent into madness. And it's just, like I said, that's the biggest film that I've ever seen of Heath Ledger, where he just disappeared into the character. Like, he just went into it. And there's still some stuff you can laugh at, like how did Two-Face not see that Joker was the nurse when he is in full makeup and just has a mask on? Like, you can laugh at that aspect, but like, talking about that scene where it was like improvised by Heath Ledger when he's walking away. Like you just see how his body mannerisms change, and especially when he's dressed as a nurse and he's walking away, you see him a little more slouched and hunched over, and he looks a little maniac and maniac, and you see how he's like hitting the detonator because it didn't go off, and like that was like improvised by him, and just like okay, and then he walks on. Like there's just such a brilliant depth to that performance of Joker. It still is my favorite. I love Jack and what he did. Of course, Mark Hamill is the go-to for the voice for Joker, but Heath just gave such a dynamic, incredible performance that still sticks with me to this day.
Well, yeah, in my opinion, it's the most accurate representation of the relationship between Batman and the Joker, and that yin and yang type thing, like the ultimate good versus the ultimate evil kind of thing, because you have that conversation at the end where they finally do like connect again at the end of the film, and he's like, why do you want to kill me? And Joker's like, I don't want to kill you. I need you. You complete me. You give me purpose to do what I do, kind of thing. And that's the type of interpersonal relationship that they have in the comics that never really got to be explored previously, that I think they did such a good job of touching on, that, you know, there's always purpose behind what I do, but you're the reason for it, kind of thing. Like, I know you're going to be this, you know, virtuous person that kind of helps not necessarily thwart my plans, but is the perfect foil for what I'm trying to do, kind of thing.
It's like a game and enjoyment by Joker. That's what motivated him to keep being the maniac he was, right, because he got such a kick out of having Batman, and how could he foil or confuse him, or what could he do? Like, it's a game to the Joker.
I still cry when he burns the big pile of money. I'm just like, ugh. But it speaks to how well he is. He's like, I don't care about the money. I'm not doing this for the money.
Just sliding down it and
okay. So matter of fact, you know.
And how many people are still quoting about making a pencil disappear, and, you know, how did I get these
why
scars?
So serious? Yeah, where is she? You know, like all that stuff. It really speaks to the quotability of the film, but the lasting power that it's had too, because it's still widely considered the best, not only the best Batman movie, but it might be on a lot of people's top list of best comic book movies ever made. And up there for best overall films, period, which is really impressive to do given the genre, because a lot of people like to, you know, I call them film snobs, like to dunk on comic book movies and say there's no depth and no real storytelling. But go watch The Dark Knight and tell me there's not brilliant acting and storytelling and, you know, anything you want in a really good film. I dare you to watch that and tell me that there's none of that in that one, because it's so well done and so brilliantly made. Yeah,
absolutely. I just love The Dark Knight. I wanted to keep in the comic book realm there that it's one of the best. I mean, I love just about everything Christopher Nolan has done too. So like, he knows how to make a film. He cares about the characters and the story and the presentation and everything. These movies aren't cash grabs or anything else for him. Like, he cares about the art of cinema and what he puts out. And even doing comic book, which I think a lot of people were still surprised that he did comic book movies, is that he was able to do so well with Batman.
Yeah, it fit the type of tone of film that he likes to make, and did such an amazing job with that trilogy, but specifically The Dark Knight in particular was so well done and still so rewatchable to this day. That's one that'll stand the test of time for him for sure. I do want to kind of pivot away from comic books a little bit. I didn't put it down on my list, but I kind of wanted to talk about it. We can kind of include this in its own category, but I wanted to talk some animated films, because we do love animated films as well. My favorite animated film of all time is a Disney film. It's The Lion King. And that's, if you've never seen The Lion King, what are you doing? Like, it's so good. It's got, in my opinion, start to back, the best soundtrack in not just an animated film, but it may have the best soundtrack of all time for me. Like, the music in
Tarzan, you've got
Tarzan's
to put
up there
Phil
too,
Collins
for sure.
Just went insane on the Tarzan soundtrack.
Overall quality of storytelling in that film, beautifully visually, great stories, great songs, like just the perfect animated film for me. The story of, you know, the kid lion being cast out by his pride and returning to kind of take over as the king and take his rightful place, and the circle of life and all the wonderful visual representations in the film. And it's in my opinion, the perfect animated movie.
Just way to bring up our childhood trauma, Josh.
I know.
Jeez. That was one of the most traumatic. Like, I love The Lion King. My youngest daughter, she is a huge fan of The Lion King. She cannot wait for Mufasa to come out. But yeah, The Lion King is near perfection. Like, it was darker and more dramatic than expected. I mean, you see Mufasa die, and it gets me every time. Being 40 years old now, Simba going up to his dad and trying to get him to wake up, like, that still breaks me. Like,
every time.
Yeah, it is fantastic. And people are still singing the songs, and even I make fun of the songs of just mixing in words, because I think a lot of them does have you could hear this if you're listening for it, but yeah, Elton John had so many incredible songs on there. Just everything was incredible, and it was so well done. That's where a lot of people are mixed on the live action CG adaptations, because you're trying to take something that was near perfection and redo it, and they did an okay job. I was okay with it, but you just cannot touch with James Earl Jones as Mufasa and his voice and everything you had in there, and Jonathan Taylor Thomas being the young Simba. He was a perfect voice for young Simba and everything, and Matthew Broderick, and it was just everybody was so well done, even forgetting that Mr. Bean was Zazu and everything in there. Like, it was just it is such an incredible animated film.
Jeremy Irons is Scar as well. Like, just so many iconic voices in that film. And it's just a beautiful story, like coming of age tale, and, paired with incredible music that I think it was really perfected in that Disney environment. It spawned an incredibly long running and successful Broadway play as well, multiple time Tony winner, just incredible long lasting run on Broadway as well, which speaks to how good the music is the fact that it's spurned a Broadway musical that's been around for a couple decades
music when
now.
you hear it, what
you're getting, and it's just so well done. Such a brilliant animated film. That I know you had a couple of other Disney movies on your list too that I kind of wanted to pair it in its own category, but for me personally, individually, it was The Lion King. It came out when I was still really young and loved going to the theater as a kid, and remember going and seeing this and just being in awe of everything and having that perfect moment that I still go back and watch it, and I'm still just like, it takes me back to being a kid again.
Yeah, one I would put up there right alongside The Lion King is Aladdin. Like,
beautiful.
Who doesn't know Robin Williams' Genie? Like,
perfect casting.
This is my favorite probably animated film of all time is Aladdin.
Music.
I'd put it a little bit above Lion King, but they're right in the same area just because of the impact it had on me. Great music. It was a fun story to watch. It was different. It was interesting, but it was Robin Williams just stole the show of everything that he did with Genie. And like, it was just incredible to me. It's something I showed to my girls as soon as I could. We've watched it over and over again. I love The Lion King, love The Lion King, but I love Aladdin. Like, there was just something about it when I was a kid that enthralled me and that I really enjoyed. And like I said, a big part of it was Aladdin. I'd love for them to finally release all the outtakes and the other cuts and stuff that Robin Williams did, because they said they could do a bunch of different, like, hours and hours of footage of just him ad-libbing as the Genie.
I love it. It is the literal definition of perfect casting for that, because he was so brilliant, and they tried to do it with Will Smith in the live action one, and he did fine, but it's not Robin Williams, right? At the end of the day, like, just absolutely brilliant. The music in that movie is amazing as well. Like, you still hear people singing A Whole New World, and what's the other really popular one? Prince Ali. I hear people singing a lot of times, just running through. It's just so rewatchable and still holds up the test of time, and it's still a fun watch today. And even though it's 30 years later, that it's such a brilliant film. And those films both came out around the similar time. It was really a golden age in a lot of people's eyes for animated films, because you have in that time frame also you had those two movies. You had Beauty and the Beast come out around that time as well. So many iconic Disney films, and then like 5 to 10 year window where they really hit it out of the park every single time.
Everything was just hit.
And music was on point and everything, to the point where like those were winning Oscars for their soundtracks, like putting it up against real films, and it was beating them. Like, that's the testament of how good it is. And that's one of my favorite things, like being a musician, is when you get the music with a film right and it's on point, it can really enhance a movie and like really elevate it to a whole other level, a whole new world, if you will. But I know. You see what I did? Sorry, I apologize for that. But like, it can make a film. It can make a good film great, and it can make a great film incredible and iconic. And I think that's what Disney did so well with those movies is it paired the songs and the soundtracks and made an already good film even better.
Well, like when I threw in when you're talking about the soundtrack with Tarzan, like I don't think as many people remember the Tarzan movie as fondly as they remember the soundtrack because it was just Phil Collins. There's a meme out there of a guy playing a piano that's on fire, and it's like, all right, Phil, we just need a simple soundtrack to it, and this is what Phil Collins did, because that is revered as one of the greatest soundtracks as well. Fantastic, because he just destroyed it. And another one that I think for our generation that's, and I'm going to throw in here with Aladdin. It's not up there with Aladdin and Lion King for the same reasons, but it's still one of my favorite Disney films of all time that I absolutely love. And it's mainly like 2 or 3 songs on the soundtrack, but it's a Goofy movie.
Absolutely.
You have Eye to Eye.
Amazing.
You have, and even their song when school's going out, when me and my kids watch it, I always do it, and I'm going to sit on my butt. Like, I'll do that part of the song every time with my girls, and they both look at me and they wait for me to do that part. Like, I love watching that film with my kids. That's one that I just, if we've been having a bad week or a bad time or something, the school's been rough or something, I'll sit down and snuggle up with my girls and we'll watch a Goofy movie. Like it was such a good another father-son movie that you got a little more depth to Goofy than you actually got. Because, I mean, he's trying to bond with Max, and you get them arguing and fighting and
Max was kind of a
everything else. And Max was a jerk to his dad. But it's also coming around the time when, you're getting interested in boys and girls getting interested in each other and all this other stuff. It was a movie that came out at the right time, but it's like that soundtrack, especially those couple power line songs, just really stick with our generation. Like whenever we hear that dun da da da, you'll get all the 30 and 40-year-olds who are like,
we're like, yes, I love it. They actually just recently put out a rock Disney cover album again. Mm-hmm. Like there's a new version of that just came out that it's got a really well done version of Eye to Eye on it. Yep. And that was the first song that I listened to. It's probably one of, if not my top favorite Disney song. Like it's top 3 or 4 at least for his just an incredibly well done. Tevin Campbell did an amazing job on that song, singing it like for that movie. The movie's got the most epic cheese pull I think of a pizza I've ever seen in my life. I'm still chasing that cheese pull to this day, like visually, but that's such a fun movie as well. And
how many times have we tried? Every boy and girl have tried to do the dance.
Yes, and I still can't get it.
Or Alphabet Soup, Hey Dad Soup with the Bigfoot and everything. Like,
I love it.
It is such a memorable film. Like, I wouldn't put it up there with Aladdin and Lion King, but it still has such great memories to me as a kid, but also now as a dad sharing it with my kids. Yeah, I just love that experience of watching it with them and that they love it and we sing the songs and we have such a fun time with it. There's such just good memories attached to a Goofy movie.
We have such reverence for animated films in general because there's so many good ones. There's so many really good animated movies that you could pull from. It's a really, like, a lot of people think like when you get older you can't appreciate them anymore because you're not a kid. I throw BS on all of that entire statement. Mm-hmm. I love going back and watching animated movies too. Doesn't make me any less of an adult. I still pay my bills. Like, leave me alone. But like animated films still, get off my lawn. And animated films still hold up and they're still really good. They're really great forms of art that I really think are good for like bringing people together, bringing families together, because you have different types of animated films. There's, the really strong rise in popularity of, Japanese animated films now with the, all the anime films and stuff that are coming out in the TV shows. And you love to see that medium continue to grow and evolve over the years like it has. But even now you're getting like Pixar, the second highest grossing film of the year is still an animated film. Like still,
Pixar's been such a powerhouse. Like how many who don't love Toy Story or, I mean, Wall-E is a big one for me and my wife that is still fine. Like I'll go up to her and tell her Eva, and she'll give me her hand and say Wall-E, and we'll do stuff like that. That's like adorable. There's just such, I know we are.
It's adorable, man.
But it's just that fun stuff. That stuff just resonates with you through animation. Like especially Pixar, there's so much stuff for adults and plenty enough for kids. Like animation is not just for kids. Even like look at our last review here with Transformers 1. That was a really fun, amazing film that we had a good time with, that adults and kids alike can have a really good time.
Absolutely, and and that deserves its place on anybody's favorite list. If you talk to anybody that has favorite movies and an animated film's not on one of them, I don't trust you. Like, I really don't, because there's so many things you could take from them that are still good when it comes to filmmaking, and not the traditional shooting a camera and like, you know, creating art that way. It's a different type of art that is more than worthy of its appreciation. And it's had the staying power that it's got. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, so they know what they're doing.
And we didn't have it on our list here to talk about, but both of the Spider-Verse films that we've got so far were incredible from an acting standpoint, from how many different styles of animation they mixed in.
Brilliant.
Just mixing hand-drawn with 3D animated like that. They deserve so much recognition for the amazing hard work that they did, especially like in the second one. There were so many quick changes between so many different visual styles that I know was an extreme undertaking to mix so many different styles together at one point. Like both of them were brilliant.
Yeah. Massive respect to, you know, animated features and stuff like that. I do want to pivot away from that now to keeping kind of like the big feature film type of, you know, movies that we want to include on our list. It's one that has spawned, you know, 2 trilogies and is on pace to have another film come out at the beginning of next year. And it's on both of our lists, and it's one that we both got super excited about a couple years ago when they re-put it out in the theaters again, and that's Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Specifically, the first Jurassic Park film. Jurassic Park is an absolutely incredible movie that, on the surface, it shouldn't work in a film setting. Like, you have giant dinosaurs, and how are you going to make that work in a film? And, you know, they did it in a way that was both practical, terrifying, and just really brilliantly done and shot in a way that still, like, a couple decades after it's been out, still holds up so solid and so strong today. And it's still in so many different things in pop culture still that it's having a lasting impact. I literally just saw a Jurassic Park Jeep like a couple days ago on the road.
We have Jurassic Park vehicles that drive around our area.
Yes.
They're all decked out as the Jurassic Park Jeep.
Absolutely brilliant film. One of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh, absolutely. It's on my list, as you said, because it was so unique. I mean, it's Spielberg. We know just how good he is at filmmaking, but like you said, like it's a movie about dinosaurs in a park that goes wrong. Like, it could be okay, but it was so brilliantly done, and we know none of the films that have come after it have come close. And I also know it's nothing like the book. Like, I am rereading the book, and I'm like 86%. I'm reading on my Kindle and everything, about 86%, and it's vastly different. But I can appreciate the book for what it is and what the movie is, because I love that horror thriller aspect of it. Everyone was cast so well, just so much stuff. But it was the practicality of the dinosaurs, seeing even behind the scenes footage of the T-Rex and of how they did like the Triceratops and everything else. Like, it was just, there's nothing else really like it, and they did it so well acted, had the drama, had humor, but had horror, had thriller. I mean, Dr. Ian Malcolm, everyone just remembers that character from there just because of his, even like his unbuttoned shirt laying on the table is still a meme and around everywhere. It was just, it's a fantastic movie.
Yeah, and it's one of those that, like I said, stands up to the test of time. It's got all the it ticks all the really good boxes, like you said, that you look for in a movie. The horror in it was very real. I remember being terrified of that movie when I was a kid when it came out, because especially like the scenes where the velociraptors, who they pose as these very real threats, like have these kids cornered in the kitchen and are chasing them around. That suspense was very real. Like, you were concerned like that something was going to happen to these kids, and it was just so well done in a practical way that made sense, and it just ticked so many of the right boxes for me. That high rewatchability is a really big factor in my favorite movies. Can I watch it more than once and look forward to watching it every time I watch it? And Jurassic Park's one of those films. Like I said, we got really excited when they re-released it a couple years ago. We're like,
it was IMAX re-release.
Yes, I was like, oh, we're absolutely, day one, we're there. Like, we got actively excited to see it because we love it as much as we do. But that speaks to how good a movie is when it really resonates with you like that, in a way that you get just as excited to see it 20 something years after you saw it for the first time. And it was like watching it for the first time all over again.
And I remember how excited we got to a few years ago going to San Diego Comic-Con, and we decided it was our first time ever going up to Universal Hollywood. Yeah. And we did the behind the scenes tour and everything. And we got to go into the set, which they were about to start filming what ended up being either the last or the second to last season for Superstore. Yeah. And we're walking around. That's pretty neat. We're on a soundstage. We're seeing this, and the tour guide tells us, yeah, this is also the same soundstage where they filmed the kitchen scene for Jurassic Park. And we're both like,
nerding out
that we're where the kitchen scene was done for Jurassic Park. I'm like, the velociraptors and everything else in the scene. Like, we both looked at each other like, we're big kids again, because we loved it so much. Like, it was just, it's one I revisit and go back to often. Like, I can have fun and enjoy the rest of them, but none of them come anywhere close to what Jurassic Park was. I mean, again, I know it's vastly different than the books, but I appreciate for what it gave me. I hadn't read the books or know anything about it at that point when I watched it, and it was just incredibly done. Like, it's such a unique film in its way, and it did change a lot, but it was just so well done.
Yeah, and the casting was on point. Jeff Goldblum being peak Jeff Goldblum in that for that film. Just
he was perfect for Ian.
Life finds a way is still a quote that people talk about to this day. Like, you've got, Samuel L. Jackson as a bit role in that film as well. Hold on to your butts, is still something that people say. And, it has all of the makings of a summer blockbuster. That is a really good embodiment of what a summer blockbuster film is. It's got all of the elements you want in a type of film like that. It's big, it's grandiose, incredible. You want to talk about soundtracks that we've been talking about? That iconic Jurassic Park theme, the John Williams score, amazing, epic, iconic. You hear that? I've played that for people as like a social experiment before. And I play the song, and people immediately like sit up, turn their heads. And I've had more than one person go, "Welcome to Jurassic Park." I'm like, yes, that's the reaction I wanted. But that's the lasting power that music and film, when they marry each other perfectly, have. And like, that's one of those iconic cases that has spurned countless sequels now, and is a multi-billion-dollar franchise in its own right. And it was just a brilliant kickoff for I still feel they're chasing that to this day. But I would say The Lost World was. The second one was still I'd still count it as a good movie. But,
okay.
Like, didn't touch the magic of that first one. That first one is just, it's a chef's kiss. Like, it's absolutely fantastic film, and will always be on one of my favorite films lists, no matter when you ask.
Yeah, the next one I want to throw out, I've got to talk about because, and we do have a sequel to it coming out this year, is Gladiator.
So good.
Like, I mean, that's a pinnacle when someone thinks of Russell Crowe's career. That is one of the films I think about, but it even shocks me even more the more I learn about the behind the scenes and how the film was made, and just how they talk about how big of a mess it was making that movie when they turned out something as incredible. Because I'm also a sucker for time period stuff as well.
Sure.
But Gladiator was so dramatic, so well acted. The action sequences were great, other than seeing the bottles of the nitrogen and everything else that was in the carts to flip it over and stuff like it. But it was just so well acted. The story was great. You got Joaquin Phoenix in such a good role. Brilliant. Of everyone's getting the thumbs or the thumbs up, and just it was so well done. A lot of quotable lines in that one as well. But it's a beautiful film to look at. It was such a dark, dramatic story that was just the set pieces and the clothing designs and everything else was so well done. Like, you were just transported into this world, into this drama and everything else, and it was just so brilliantly done to me.
So good. And it's an absolutely epic period piece, like you mentioned. A wonderful story of this gladiator, for lack of a better term, Maximus, who is on this more or less a revenge quest, and it's one of the most epic scenes, like, in the back half of the movie, with the very quotable "Are you not entertained?" Like, the real gritty, dark, like, human elements that are in this story, and like of how things operated back then. And it's cinematic wise, the cinematography in it is incredible. The music, the pacing of the film is incredible. brilliantly acted. Russell Crowe's best film, hands down, in my opinion.
Yeah, he's done a ton of incredible films,
Yeah.
but Gladiator's still
It's
at the
still
top
the
of
pinnacle
list.
for me. I am so excited for the sequel. I hope it lives up. It looks like it's got an amazing cast as well. Well, it does have an amazing cast, but it looks like it could potentially be, hopefully, on par with the original. But yeah, like such an iconic film that, you know, more than stood the test of time, and it's definitely one that I'll if I'm scrolling through and it's on, I'll put on and watch for a little while for sure. Like it's really stood the test of time as well, and I could see why that one would be on your list for sure. I wanted to touch on one last like film in particular for me, another one that's like super up there as far as like pop culture wise, and that's Star Wars. Like Star Wars is, you know, for science fiction, like one of the premier franchises. It's everywhere. It's in theme parks. It's integrated in everything. My particular favorite Star Wars movie is actually yours as well, and that's The Empire Strikes Back. It's the second film in the original trilogy, which is episode 5, if you count the books. If you don't know the backstory behind it, don't do the math. It makes sense to absolutely nobody besides George Lucas, but we're not going to dive into that there. But from my perspective, it is the best Star Wars film, and it's one of my favorite movies. It's got so many interesting dynamics. You've already been introduced to all these characters, and now they're in the middle of this Rebel Alliance attack on, you know, the Empire. You know, you have the end of A New Hope where they blew up the original Death Star. Now they're kind of trying to take some of the fight to the Empire a little bit more, but they're also in a little bit of a retreat, regathering, and ready to attack. And there's so many different things that go into this film that make it really, really well done. There's a fun twist in it. It's got one of the most iconic cinematic reveals in the history of cinema, in my opinion, that had so many people talking, that's still parodied to this day, that people quote. And they quote it wrong. A lot of cases. It's not the actual line of dialogue that they use in the film. I will ride that wave until the day I die.
I still feel like, because we're talking about Luke, I am your father. I have a feeling all that came about from Tommy Boy.
I guarantee.
Because Tommy Boy, Chris Farley's doing that into the fan, and he, if I'm remembering it right, he goes, Luke, I am your father, in that way. And I think that helped create that Mandela effect, that people were remembering it wrong. I might be wrong, but that's where I'm getting it. That I think I remember it is because of Chris Farley saying it that way in Tommy Boy.
Yeah, and then that could have an effect on a lot of people, but it's not the right one. Go back and watch the film. But it's such a well done, well shot. Visually, you get so many more dynamic like pieces. You start off on the ice planet Hoth with Luke, and his next step in his story, on his way to, trying to become a Jedi Knight and everything like that. And it's so many iconic moments from Star Wars happen in this film that are some of the most quotable, and I'll use that a lot, but it's some of the most quotable lines in the history of Star Wars and in the history of films, that it really holds a fond place in my heart. I got super excited recently when we got to go back and watch it in theaters finally, when they put it out in theaters for us to watch, because we didn't get that because these films came out before we were born, but we still hold them in such high regard that it's, for my money, the best Star Wars film.
That was interesting with me because I didn't get into Star Wars until late. I was like 7th or 8th grade because, Return of the Jedi came out the year I was born.
Sure.
And I didn't get into 7th, 8th grade because we were doing state testing at that time, and our English teacher put on A New Hope. And I'm like, what is this? And people are telling me, you haven't seen Star Wars? And no, I haven't seen it. And we didn't even get to watch all of A New Hope, but I immediately went home that day, and we had to go to Blockbuster, and I had to rent the entire trilogy because this was just a couple years before they did the special edition. So I got to watch the originals on VHS, got the VHS box sets, took them home, and watched them all in a single day, and rewatched them and begged for the special editions when they came out. Like, I was hooked from the moment. So with that, A New Hope does have a special part of me. Again, it's kind of just like with Harry Potter. Like, I absolutely love the Harry Potter series. Sorcerer's Stone sticks with me because it introduces you to that magic. It just has that magic and feel to it. And I think A New Hope did as well. Like, it just introduced me to Star Wars, and it got this magic behind it. But I do love Empire. Like when you talk to most people, the most memorable scene and sequence in most of these Star Wars films are talk about Hoth and the Battle of Hoth and everything that happened there. You've got Yoda introduced, you've got, Cloud City, and you got the I love you, I know, and just there's so much iconic stuff that happened in Empire. So yeah, it is definitely high up there on, again, a pinnacle of how to do a sequel correct, but also just such a great film overall. I mean, of course, for most, Return of the Jedi was a bit of a step down with the Ewoks and the celebration and everything. I still enjoy it, but there's a lot of people that despise or don't like Return of the Jedi, and it's like it's A New Hope and it's Empire when you're really talking to a lot of them about Star Wars.
Yeah, like we say, one of my favorite things to say is nobody hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans. But either way, like those are both two incredibly well done movies. I love Star Wars. I love Empire Strikes Back in particular. It's so well done. It's got everything you want in a Star Wars science fiction-y type stuff. Like you said, so many iconic moments you can go back and point to. A really, really well done movie that still holds up to this day and is, in my opinion, the best Star Wars film.
Yeah, and like I said, I could probably sit here and talk for 4 or 5 hours about favorite films.
Easily.
Like my list is like double the size of yours, and I know I didn't even touch on everything. So maybe we'll revisit this again and go on some more, because I've got like, especially a lot of stuff from childhood, like the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Secret of the Ooze. Both of those, I got my girls watching. I love going back into it as like Hook with Steven Spielberg and Robin Williams again. Like Robin Williams is a part of a lot of my favorites, even like the Jason Bourne series, which I don't hear a lot of people. I don't hear a lot of bad talk about it. That's one of my like favorites. Like to me, that's top pinnacle Matt Damon. That and The Martian. Like I loved Jason Bourne. I love The Martian. But there's so many films that I could go into. Even like Fifth Element, which was a guilty pleasure film of mine. That is still one of my favorites. Even though it's silly, it's goofy, it's over the top, but it's still one of my favorite films of all time. Like I could still sit here and talk for 2 or 3, 4 more hours on all my favorite films.
There's so many franchises that we haven't even touched on. As far as favorite films, like you said, we hadn't touched on Harry Potter yet. We hadn't touched on, neither one of us mentioned The Godfather, which I know we both love. I love the movie Heat I didn't put in there. There's so many different films that we can make talking about this list because we love film as much as we do. There's so many that we didn't touch on that there's no possible way we could get to all of this in one easily digestible podcast. That I definitely feel like we're going to have to come back and do a part 2 for this, and I would love to do it in a way in our schedule that makes sense and do another episode where we talk about this. This is so much fun to talk about, and I want to encourage everybody that's listening and watching this. Thank you for sticking through this entire episode to kind of indulge us, waxing poetic about what we love about film, but come to our socials, come to our Discord, tell us about your favorite films, what they mean to you, and why they hold such a strong place for you. We would love to have that dialogue about that with you. We're passionate about film. It's why we're doing this podcast to begin with. If we didn't love it as much as we do, we wouldn't be sitting here recording these episodes every week and talking about it. But it's such a fun thing to talk about. I don't know of anybody that doesn't have a list of their own. If you've got a list, put it together. Send it to us. We'd love to talk about it with you. But I think we can save it for now and get to a part 2 eventually where we could go deeper into some of these. Like I know you put a significantly longer list. I have a way longer list that I can name
trimmed
on.
a bunch down too.
Yeah, I intentionally kept it short because I know the ones that I put on this list we could talk about. I didn't even touch on Tarantino films. One of my favorite films of all time is a Tarantino film.
And I didn't talk about Tim Burton, which I love a lot of his stuff too.
There's so many more different paths that we can go down and talk about that I think this is a good place to leave it for now, and we'll definitely come back with a part 2 for sure.
Yeah, so as he said, come to our socials, come to our Discord, tell us your favorite films. Let's get that discussion going because it's a fun conversation to have because you see how these films affects people differently. They said it can be a film you watch during a happy time in your life that just hit at the perfect moment, or that comedy that can always get you laughing, or that drama that really hits that emotional level that you need, whether it's to make you cry or make you feel better about your situation or something else, or Field of Dreams, like Remembering My Dad and that aspect of stuff. Like these films can have an impact on you and who you are, and just a lot of it matters when it hits you. So they're really good to talk about because it can transport you back to your childhood, or to your teenage years, or to your younger, or when you were dating, or something else. Like, you can really be wrapped up in your life in different ways for different reasons, and it can mean something different to everybody. Like, we could love the same film but see it in two different ways, or have it had a different impact on each of us.
And that's the beautiful part about it, is like, people watch movies for different reasons. People have different criteria of what they do and don't like in a film. And that's what's fun to have this conversation. Like, you could sit here and roll your eyes at some of the things that we've talked about, our favorite films, but it's the criteria that we've set for ourselves. I know people that just want to turn their brain off and watch a funny movie, and they don't care that they get any type of deep meaning out of it because they find it in other places in their life, which is more than fine. It's perfectly fine. But I love having that conversation with people. I'm like, I like seeing people's perspectives on what they like to watch in film and what they get from their viewing experience and what they want to get from that viewing experience. Because I know plenty of people that have never seen an Academy Award winning film, or actively avoid them because they don't care to have, for whatever reason, to, you know, not have any artistic, you know, film. They just want to turn their brains off and laugh for 2 hours. So they'll go and watch, like, you know, White Chicks or something like that.
Kind of same with the music. Like, well,
Nothing
once a
really wrong
band
with
gets
White Chicks. I love
popular,
White Chicks.
once a band gets popular, they're not going to listen to them anymore because they're popular. And it's the same way with movies.
Sure.
Some people will not watch the popular movie just because it's popular.
Yeah, sure. And that's fine too. Like, I love having conversations with anybody like that too. Like, we get different things out of it, and it's fun to have that dialogue to talk about it, because right, wrong, or indifferent, we all love movies one way or another. Like, what goes into a good film for you, and what films do you hold dear? Does it hit in the right notes, like we talked about for us at certain points of our lives, that really stick with us forever? Or is it just something you went, wow, that was really fun, I had a lot of enjoyment watching that for 2 hours, and not a lot of people like it, but I absolutely loved it, and I love having those conversations. But I think that's a good spot to end this episode, just because we could talk for 7, 8, 9, 10 hours and do an all-day podcast on this, but I do kind of want to save that for another episode to kind of leave people hanging on, because there's so many more films that we can touch on.
We'll have to come back and revisit this.
Definitely come back and review it for sure.
So what's coming up this week? So we do have another, what looks to be a potentially emotional but fun animated film in The Wild Robot. I'm really looking forward to seeing what that is. And then we also have the Francis Ford Coppola epic that's had a lot of mixed talks. There's been good, bad, all around. Like, we don't know if this is going to help it, hurt it, what it's going to be in his Megapolis movie. Like, it looks grand and big and crazy, but yeah, there's just been controversy and other stuff around it. Just don't know exactly how people are going to take that film. Yeah,
there's a lot of mixed reviews on that one for sure. I am super excited about The Wild Robot. Excited to go watch that when I get back in town and talk about it for our next episode. It's going to be a ton of fun. I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, on the streaming side, so we talked about it a couple episodes ago, the Mr. McMahon documentary on Netflix comes out on September 25th. So from the trailer and everything talked about, it doesn't look like they're pulling any punches talking about the controversy and everything around Vince McMahon and, you know, what he did at WWE. Some they're going to shed light on some of the good, but there's a lot of bad to talk about there. So that's going to be an interesting documentary series to pay attention to, especially if you liked wrestling at all. Like, I know Josh is still big into wrestling. I was the Attitude Era. That was kind of the last time that I really was into it, but it's still a very popular.
It's doing big business again, man. It's definitely one that's definitely one I'll be watching as soon as I can.
We also have Will and Harper on Netflix that comes out on September 27th. That was one that kind of caught me off guard. So it's a former Saturday Night Live writer that Will Ferrell was friends with, decided to transition, and it shows kind of how Will dealt with that and how they did it. And they went on a road trip together, kind of discovering and figuring things out. And it looks really amazing. Like, I can't wait to check it out. It looks like there's going to be some decent amount of humor, but looks like there's a lot of heart of just trying. And we know how crazy things are in the world when it comes to the trans community and everything else, and this looks like a good little film to watch, to see, to try to get some heart and emotion behind the people and understanding and everything else, and seeing, you know, how Will Ferrell, and I just love that they started off, because I hadn't heard nothing about this, and it starts off with Will Ferrell saying, I'm Will Ferrell, one of the greatest actors to ever live, and then it gets into the meat of it, and it's like, oh wait, this is completely different than what I was expecting.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be one that a lot of people are going to have very strong opinions on, but I'm excited to check it out too, because it looks like it's going to be a really good watch, and hopefully we get some good, you know, some good messages out of it as well. And just do better, people. That's all I can say.
We also have the Brad Pitt and George Clooney film Wolves that'll be on Apple TV Plus on September 27th. So this one has kind of been an odd one because it was headed to theaters, but then they pulled it out of theaters and it's just going to do streaming now. And you've got two big names, but it's another one with Apple that there hasn't been that great of an advertising campaign behind it. Most of what people search as well, it was coming for a short run in theaters and now it's just back to streaming. But it could be interesting having two powerhouse actors as them together again. Of course, we know they did the Ocean films and everything together. To have them back together doing this film, I'm looking forward to checking that out on Apple TV Plus.
Yeah, it's just another case of Apple not knowing how to advertise their own stuff. Well, a lot of brilliant stuff on Apple. I can't sing its praises enough, but they don't pay me to advertise for it, so I'm not going to hype it up too much. But there's a lot of good stuff on there. You should go check it out.
And this is a huge week for TV, so this is basically coming back to premiere week. We're getting a lot of our network and cable TV shows of returning shows are coming back this week. Too many to talk about at once. I was going to highlight a couple of the newer shows that looked decent. So we got Brilliant Minds. It's another doctor show, but he's like trying to experience. It looks like a spiritual successor to House to me, and I absolutely loved House because he's trying to figure out how to help his patients by going through what they're going through and putting himself in their place. And it looks very House-esque. So that'll be on NBC on September 23rd. And another one that looks kind of interesting, it's another one from Ryan Murphy that you have Grotesquerie, which I'm not sure if I'm saying right or not, but this is another horror series that looks intriguing. It's also got kind of the debut of Taylor Swift's boyfriend as an actor. You have Travis Kelce doing a role in here, which you briefly got to see him in the trailer. So it's going to be interesting to see if he has an acting career ahead of him, because he's also going to be in Happy Gilmore 2, and he's lining up. So maybe he doesn't have too much more time in football before he goes and tries out acting. But those are two that looked interesting. But yeah, we have so many shows coming back this week across all networks. So make sure you check your TV schedule to see when your favorite shows come back, because within the next week or two, most of them will be back to a regular kind of season, because they didn't have a regular season because of the strike and everything else. Everything was, a lot of these shows had their second half in the summer when normally they're off the air, and now we're getting back into the regular seasons for TV shows.
Yeah, where a lot of popular shows were truncated to, partial seasons because of it, but it looks like we're finally getting back into that regular rotation of TV seasons lasting in, normal lengths and normal episodes, people getting back to work, which is always a good thing. I love when all the TV shows and stuff come back. It's always an exciting time, especially the fall premieres where everything gets brand new. There's so many new shows to watch as well. I always like to encourage people to take a minute, if you can, to check out a show you may not normally have checked out. Like, I know a lot of people have their habits and like, I'm looking forward to this season of the show. Maybe throw a recording on for something you think may look interesting and give it the time. You might find something new. A lot of times there's so many cases of shows that get a hardcore devoted fan base, but it's not big enough to sustain it on a network that, if more people would give it a shot, they might like it and help sustain these shows longer.
I still miss you, Firefly.
I know Brad's been waxing poetic about Firefly.
It's only been 22 years,
but for good reason. That show should have continued, but it's reasons like that you gotta, take the time to support these shows and hopefully get them longer lasting on these networks than you'd like. So
that's also the problem, that there's so much stuff to watch, especially with stream. Not only you got broadcast TV and cable TV, and now you have streaming, so many exclusive shows. There's so much to watch. It's impossible to try to watch everything, but there's just so much good stuff, but there's
a lot of stuff.
Shows are not getting as long as they may normally have, and in Netflix, most shows there get maybe 3-4 seasons, and we're seeing stuff not get the leeway that a lot of other shows did. Well, we've got decent ratings. We'll give it another season or two. It's like, nope, we're done after like 3 episodes. We'll just pull it off. Yeah,
it's crazy to see that. But take an opportunity to watch a show. You might find something you really like. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. We can't thank you enough for your continued support. Please go to willbringthepopcorn.com. Check out all our social media stuff. Come join us on Discord. Like we said at the top, leave us a like, subscription, or review wherever you're watching or listening. Can't thank you enough. Next week's episode, we are going to be doing 2 episodes, episodes 6 and 7 of Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 2. We're coming up on the finale. We're a week away from the finale now, but we're going to be reviewing episode 6 and 7, as well as a review of The Wild Robot. I know we're both excited to check that one out as well. Another animated feature that we're very excited to check out. We can't thank you enough for listening to our favorite films. Until next time, I'm Josh, he's Brad, and we'll see you next week.